Now, it goes without saying that this is probably the toughest chapter for A2, in my opinion, by the way. So, we're going to take our time to really try to understand what this chapter is all about. And, chapter 15 is talking about control and coordination. Before we go into the detail of this chapter, just a little bit of introduction, as we always do. What exactly is coordination? Now, you don't have to memorize the meaning of coordination for the exam. That's not important. But it's good to understand what's going on. And coordination is just different parts of the body working together. As an example, if you see a piece of cake, you will look at the cake with your eyes. Obviously, you don't see the cake with, your hand or your skin or whatever. And of course, when we see the piece of cake, depending on how hungry we are, our stomach will growl. So what exactly happens is the light from the cake hits our eyes, and our eyes detect the light, and something happens in between the eyes and the stomach where the eye and the stomach communicate with each other. So the eye is located in your head, right? And your stomach is in the abdominal area. So they're quite far away from each other. So the question here is, how exactly is the eye and the stomach communicating with each other? Because when the stomach receives the signal, the stomach will growl and start to release these gastric juices. So another example of coordination is as follows. You're just minding your own business and you're walking, and your heart rate is, let's say, at 70 beats per minute. Pretty normal heart rate. Everything seems quite fine. But you're faced with a beast like a wolf. Yes, that's a wolf. Do not challenge me on that. Okay, that's a bloody wolf right there. Okay, my drawing sometimes is not the best in the world. But what happens is, when you're faced with that dangerous situation, your heart rate suddenly goes up to 120 beats per minute because you see the wolf, you hear the wolf. Makes you scared. So how exactly is the coordination happening between the eye and the heart in this situation? So those green color parts is what we have to cover for this chapter. Now, luckily for us, we have talked about control and coordination a little bit in chapter 14. You see, to coordinate different parts of the body, you need to transmit signals. Transmission of signals just means sending signals. All right. And it involves two main systems. Of course, there are other subsystems, but we are just going to look at two main ones. And the first system is the endocrine system. Good news for us, we've actually covered the endocrine system in chapter 14, homeostasis. Now, the endocrine system involves endocrine glands. They're just organs that release chemical signals known as hormones. So you have the endocrine gland and you have the target organ. And for example, in chapter 14, the endocrine gland can be the pancreas and the target organ can be the liver, where the pancreas will send two types of signals to the liver cells. They can send the insulin and glucagon, right? Or in chapter 14, we also learned that the endocrine gland was the posterior pituitary gland, and the target organ, which is the place that responds to the hormone, is the collecting duct, because the name of the hormone, that means how is the posterior pituitary gland communicating with the collecting duct? They are communicating by using the hormone ADH, the antidiuretic hormone. So the hormones are just the signals that are being sent from one part of the body to another part of the body. But normally what's supposed to happen first is, how does the endocrine gland know that, I have to send up the pancreas, for example? How does it know, I have to release glucagon or I have to release insulin? The type of signal it sends depends on the stimulus. Okay, so a stimulus is just a change that happens in the body. It's detected by something called receptors. We saw this in chapter 14. I'm just repeating myself. And the endocrine gland, when they receive the stimulus and they detect it, they will release specific types of hormones. Now, it is just important to know that hormones are these chemical signals that travel through the blood. And once they travel through the blood, they take their time sometimes, depending on how fast the blood is moving. The hormones, as we have covered this in chapter 14, they will bind to cell surface membrane receptors on the target organ because it's quite complementary, the shape, as you can see over there. I'm circling that in green. All right, and the target organ, once they receive the hormone, they will respond accordingly. So for example, let's say the stimulus is seeing, okay, I did say a wolf earlier, but now I'm putting it as seeing a dog because I think it looks more like a dog anyway, all right? And it is detected by receptors. There is an endocrine gland called the adrenal gland. Don't have to memorize this. The adrenal gland releases adrenaline, which is the hormone, and adrenaline travels inside the blood and it binds to cardiac cells, which are your heart muscle cells. And what is the response? The response is accordingly an increase in the heart rate. Quite simple stuff. Now, the main part of this chapter, however, is looking at the nervous system. I am going to talk about the nervous system a little bit in the next part of the video when we introduce the structure of the nervous system. But the main thing about the nervous system is this. Just like the endocrine system, its main function is to send signals from the receptor to the effector. So the difference here is when the stimulus is detected by receptors, what actually happens is they are connected to these very weird looking structures that I'm throwing here. They are quite alien like when you think about it. But if you've studied biology, you know what these are. These are just called neurons. And the neurons are just these very specific, special types of cells that connect the receptor all the way to the effector. Now, if you notice, I drew my neurons in different colors. The neuron on the left here, which I'm circling, has like a lighter blue color. The one in the middle is orange. The one on the right is purple. If you're colorblind, I'm just telling you what the colors are just to differentiate them. Those are not actual colors. The reason why I'm putting them in different colors is just to show you that there are 3 different types of neurons. But what happens is a signal, which I've represented in that yellow color arrows, they are just being sent along the neurons from the left to the right, and it reaches the effector cells, and once it reaches the effector cells respond, and that signal is called the electrical impulse. Some books will call it the nerve impulse, some books will call it the action potential. They all mean the same thing, so you don't have to worry about it. And once the effector cells receive the impulse, the effector cells go okay, and they will respond accordingly in that situation. So it's the same thing when you think about it, right? If you compare it side by side, the endocrine system and nervous system, in both cases, signals are being sent from one part of the body to the other part of the body, and the effector cells will respond accordingly, okay, depending on the signal that is being sent. So the question here is, why do we need to have 2 different types of ways to send signals? We have hormones and we have electrical impulse. Why can't the body just decide to use one method of signal transmission? Some of my students will ask me the question. It seems like the nervous system is more efficient because, you know, the receptor cells are directly connected to the effector cells. Whereas for the endocrine gland, the hormones have to go into the blood and then the blood has to travel, and it doesn't necessarily mean they reach their target organs immediately. There is going to be a delay. So one of the most important questions they may ask in A levels is the comparison between the endocrine system and the nervous system. So you see, the endocrine system sends a signal called hormones, known as chemical signals, and the nervous system sends electrical impulse or nerve impulse. You can use either words in the exam, you're fine. The speed of the endocrine system in sending the signal, obviously because it uses the blood, it's slower than the nervous system, which is quite fast. Now, when the endocrine system sends the signal, when I say slow, I don't mean 2 hours or 5 days or 72 decades. No. The endocrine system takes a few minutes to function. Now, you might think that's quite fast, but the nervous system functions in the speeds of milliseconds. So it's significantly more impactful than the endocrine system. So the nervous system is significantly better than the endocrine system in terms of speed. So if you want to send signals, the nervous system kicks ass. So why then does our body have the endocrine system? Now, the reason for that is because the ATP requirement of the endocrine system is much lower, and the nervous system requires a high amount of ATP to function. It is as simple as that. By the way, the endocrine system also coordinates responses that do not need to be immediate. Okay, when you think about it, okay, like growth, do you have to grow? I don't know, like, do you have to go through puberty within a span of 2 days? Some of you may say, yes, I would like to grow as soon as possible, but growth is a process that has to be carefully coordinated. Okay, and it involves many different parts of the body undergoing mitosis at the same time. So the endocrine system decides to take over and coordinate growth because they release growth hormones, and it's a slow process and it's less energy consuming by using the endocrine system. Whereas if a ball is hurtling towards you and you need to catch the ball immediately because it's coming towards your face, you would like to use the nervous system for that. Okay, to coordinate that kind of response. So that is the difference between the endocrine system and nervous system that we just have to be aware of.